Today's webinar is being streamed live on at Discover YouTube, JQuat YouTube channel. So we are going to be posting a link on the side, on the chat, if you could share with other people out there who may want to follow us on YouTube. As the presenters make their presentation, members feel free to post your comments and questions on the chat, and which we will then take up after the presenters are done. And so today's ladies and gentlemen, today's presentation, ladies and gentlemen, will be done by two gentlemen. And if I take this opportunity to introduce the two gentlemen, one is Professor Architect Mugwima Njuguna, who is an architect and a planner and is based at the Center for Urban Studies, Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. He's a founder member of the research organization, Heritage Conservation and Human Rights. He's a registered architect. He runs the design firm Fee Architecture Plus Heritage. He has co-authored Nairobi, an Architectural Jubilee, 1963 to 2013, Volume 1, and co-audited the book Conservation of Natural and Cultural Heritage in Kenya, a cross-disciplinary approach. He is currently involved in a photograph conservation project titled Building Shared Futures. And he has other research in urban ecology and nature conservation. Sorry about that. I wish we could mute. And with Professor Mugwima, there is also landscape architect Allan Obatsa, who is a landscape architect and planner based at the Department of Landscape Architecture in JKUAT. He's also a practicing landscape architect with vast experience in the built environment and environmental management fields. His research interests in research and teaching include heritage conservation, landscape planning, and landscape architecture. So, ladies and gentlemen, without taking so much time, I will welcome other presenters to take over. I don't know whether Professor Mugwima will want to say something before Allan takes over.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you for welcoming us. The lecture will be delivered by my colleague, Allan Obatsa, because I was called on some emergency government business. So let him take over. Thank you. But I'll be able to listen, but I maybe not be able to talk. I may be able also to take a few questions at the end, but it depends. Asante.
Thank you very much. Allan, please take over.
Good day, everyone. Thank you very much for making time to come for this presentation. The presentation today is about urban conservation in Kenya. And the subject matter, our interest is to present a general overview of what urban conservation is and the picture of it in Kenya. So we'll not be going into the technicalities, as it were. What you're seeing here in this slide is the picture of Old Town Mombasa, as we know it. It represents what we know as urban heritage in Kenya, and therefore the picture for the purpose of this presentation in that sense. The presentation is made by Professor Njuguna and myself Allan Obatsa. Professor Mugwima is from the Center for Urban Studies. I am from the Department of Landscape Architecture. Both of us in the School of Architecture and Building Sciences here at Jomo Kenyatta University. So I will go just highlight the areas that I'll be talking about today. I'll introduce what conservation is. We'll also look at Nairobi, the capital city, what is in there. Mombasa, the second city, what is in there. We'll also tackle the subject of becoming heritage. And in this case, we are looking at the railway heritage in Kenya. Railway heritage, or the railway, has an important or played an important role in the growth of this country. And also we'll ask the question, what can you do as an interested party? Examples of how you can join this course. And then what can the country do, all right? Also a role to be played by the country. And then we'll also volunteers for conservation and in general. So the presentation today, without emphasizing much, is just a general overview of what conservation is. So conservation is about continuity and change. And in this sense, we are looking at ensuring continuity of who we are as a people, depending on what is being conserved or where conservation is happening, and also change. We want to embrace change. Change is inevitable, right? But we don't want to lose what we have and what is important to us. And therefore, conservation in the urban sense is continuity and change. So conservation is also past and future oriented. We're interested in what happened in history, significant events that happened in history. We're also looking at future, what will happen? What are we leaving for future generations? What are the stories? They have the right to know, right? And then we also look at conservation implies intervention at various degrees on cultural property, and it has various ways that it can be undertaken. And here I've listed 5. Number 1 is prevention of deterioration. So a conservator or whoever is conserving cultural property might be interested in managing deterioration, all right, to stop. Direct conservation, this is where you go into a property and you want to conserve through various ways. Restoration, probably going back to what it was before. Reproduction, depending on the significance, an item might be used. And then reconstruction, and especially in situations of calamities, war and conflict, etc. So in general, the main concept of conservation is wise use, and it applies even here when we're looking at cultural property. So the need to protect architecture of the past and conservation. And here we are interested in architectural heritage as well as townscape. Why these two? These are in different scales. Architectural heritage is individualistic, meaning that a building can be individually owned. However, a collection of many of these buildings, when they come together, they create a townscape, right? They create a town. And this town or these towns are not individually owned, they are communally owned, and therefore they become what we refer to as a commons. So as much as buildings are individualistic or owned individually, they are also communally owned because they represent the urban space. So why conservation? Why should we undertake conservation? Number 1 is because towns are are cultural property. They give us identity, all right? They represent or they are symbolic in nature, okay? They are historic and many other attributes that can be given to towns. They constitute a commons, yeah? They are owned by all of us. And most importantly, they can suffer a tragedy, meaning that what we have as collective memory, heritage is collective memory, we can lose it if it is not conserved. So what is it that we are conserving in the urban area? And the answer is our interest is cultural property. So the general term take care of all material objects, structures, architecture, architectural ensembles, meaning that architecture coming together, archaeological sites created by man's multifaceted cultural traditions. And then also we are interested in material manifestation and expression of what is uniquely human. Also, the types of cultural property we are interested in are movable cultural property and immovable. In a sense, movable property is what you can call portable. This is artwork, archaeology, documentation. Immovable property, these are properties that are fixed on land, such as buildings, monuments, etc. So why? Previously, I've talked about what. Next is why. Why do we need to conserve? So values assigned to cultural property. We conserve because there are values that are attached to this cultural property, and they are basically in three categories: emotional values, cultural values, and use values. Just for example, under emotional values, these places are our identity, all right? Cultural values, example is, these are places of significance. Take, for example, the historic aspect, significant events that have happened in space or in various places associated to these cultural properties become valuable. And then use values, this is related to utility, because some of this give us that value of use. It could be functional, economic, educational, political. So as we undertake conservation, there are various challenges that are brought about by change, and what we experience in society. Number one, rapid and uncontrolled technological evolution has become institutionalized, and now change is seen as synonymous with progress, so change is inevitable. Contemporary developments also delete history, right? So we cannot disregard what has been there, what has been experienced by a population, and therefore we need conservation. Dynamics of growth coupled with limited resources putting pressure on historic areas, and then inadequate legal and institutional framework, meaning that conservation has not been mainstreamed in planning practice. That is a challenge. The local community is also involved in conservation where it happens. Take, for example, all parts of Nairobi. You'll find whenever interventions are made on conservation, residents complaining about being ignored, right? So what can be done? So I talked about the various interventions. So we can work on to prevent decay, to preserve whatever is there, to restore to the original state. Reconstruction, meaning that we use new material to get new, to get the original concept. And this I mentioned, it happens mostly during disasters and conflicts. Reproduction, that is copying an exact artifact, usually to replace a missing part. And here, documentation of what was existing is very important. So even documentation becomes a way of conservation. You taking photographs, sketches, and etc. This become a way of conservation. And then reevaluation, adaptive alteration. This is related to the concept of adaptive reuse, looking at what has been there and probably the original function is obsolete, right? So how do we adapt to new uses, right? And then repair, and sometimes heritage could be unsafe, and therefore it requires demolition. So demolition is also a way of an intervention for conservation. So looking at Nairobi, we look at what is in Nairobi. In Nairobi, we have cultural and natural heritage. But for the purpose of this presentation, we look at the cultural heritage only. We'll concentrate on that. So the challenge that Nairobi has concerning conservation is there are no zoned areas we can call conservation areas. And also there is no clear criteria for identification of properties to be conserved. What has been happening is ad hoc, and especially right now it's through the local authorities, probably with the exception of a town like Lamu or Mombasa. So there are various opportunities in Nairobi of creating heritage zones. That is part of parkland. Heritage properties are exhibited in this area, Ngara, Biashara Street, Ronald Ngala. These are just examples within the capital city. So for example, a study was done under at the Center of Urban Studies in Jomo Kenyatta, looking at art deco buildings in parklands. So art deco has to do, is a style of architecture that borrowed a lot from machines, right? So we later see the forms that were generated, popular in the 20s and 30s. So the map that you're seeing there is a figure ground image with yellow indicating zones where we have this building. So you can see there are a number of them. And this study was done not long ago. And it therefore means that if change has happened, then a lot has been lost. So this is an opportunity to look at some of this property that can be qualified for conservation. So in this photo, we have, for example, these areas in blue. That is Art Deco architecture in parklands, right? And then in the background, you have conflicting styles of architecture that do not represent what is Art Deco. Image number 2 as well, you notice this, there's a new construction there. And with time, many of these buildings are getting lost through the construction of new ones, high-rise buildings. Other parts of Nairobi, this is within Nairobi CBD, you notice the orange, yellow, green buildings there. And later new ones. I think this is around River Road. You notice that change is happening, though in an undesirable manner, with painting of these heritage buildings using screaming colors. You have another one there, right, where the arrow shows. This is an old building as well. However, because of the new construction around it, this remains isolated and subdued, right? So it is lost, right? This is another one within the CBD. This is a temple on Uyoma Street near the bus station. It's called Siri Guru Singh Sabha or something like that temple, done by architect George Vamos, right? So you notice the form, interesting form there. So this is a cultural property that is heritage, right? So just a detail of what it looks like there, the dome. This is another one, the Lutheran Church, just very near State House Road and University Way, near St. Paul's Church. So this is a very interesting image, not very old, but very important as Nairobi heritage. We have also monuments such as the Tom Mboya one, right, on Moi Avenue. And then we have this building, which is Chester House. And Chester House represent brutalist architecture of 1950s, 60s, characterized by monolithic masses, right? That means rough and finished surfaces. And if you notice, you have that blue color that was painted. It takes away something from what the original intention was, right? So this is also an example of what is heritage within the city. In other parts, we have, for example, the Coca-Cola building that is recent, coming up as well. Just for us to note, the Center for Urban Studies has been involved in documentation of various of these heritage properties, this work has been exhibited in what is referred to as traveling exhibition. One of the venues has been the National Museums of Kenya. So this book is available at the center. You can visit the center, it is there. It is ongoing work. More documentation has also been done. In this case, there's a paper written and you can look for it. Reflections on the conservation of urban heritage attractions. Case of Nairobi, 1898 to 1948, probably very related to the initial plans of Nairobi as a capital city. So we have looked at what is at the core of the city. However, Nairobi and metropolitan area also has various properties that can be viewed as having heritage value, right? Take, for example, Limuru. We have important cultural heritage there. In Kikuyu, for example, we have the Watson, the church, Oldonyo Sabuk. So all these areas are within the capital metropolis. And therefore they offer opportunities for us as conservators to have interest and to look at them as well. I'll talk about Mombasa, the built heritage of Old Town Mombasa. When I started with an image of Mombasa, a representation of what heritage is in Kenya. In this photo, this is from a postcard, undated, but estimated to be just before 1982, looking at what is there, old dhows which have sails. So this is at the old port, right? Just This was the old port before we had the new one. Okay, so and Mombasa represents heritage along the Swahili coast, and Swahili coast here I mean towns such as Kismayu in Somalia. Come to Kenya, you have the Lamu, Malindi, Mombasa. You go to Tanzania, you get towns such as Bagamoyo, Kilwa, down south to Mozambique. So this can be referred to as the Kiswahili, I mean not Kiswahili, but Swahili coast, right? Otherwise known as the Zanj. So this map also represents the position of the Kenyan coast within the Western Indian Ocean, and you can see the areas that possibly the Kenyan or the East African coastline could easily relate: India, China, Oman, Yemen. Those are areas that are very close by. So the background information of Mombasa town, it is believed that the old town was founded by Arabs in 11th century, even though this is sometimes disputed that there could have been earlier people who came. First non-European Vasco da Gama arrived around 1498. The town of Mombasa was sacked by Portuguese and taken by Arabs variously, right? And the Fort Jesus was built around 1593 with the interest of the Portuguese viceroy around that time. In 1698, the town came under the Sultanate of Oman. So that's a very important date. And then later, it was governed by the British until 1963. So today, the old town is approximately 72 hectares. And the conservation areas, we know it today is 31 hectares within what is referred to as the World Governor. And the fact that some of it is outside the 31, it means that probably some properties outside the boundaries of the governor might have been left out and therefore lost. Conservation of this town happens under the National Museums and Heritage Act of 2006. So looking at the spaces within the town, for example, you find very interesting attributes there. We have Old Port of Mombasa, there you see an arrow, the bonded warehouse and the government square. You probably see it within the map that I will show. So and this map shows the topomorphological attributes. That's a form in the form of a figure ground study. So the solids in black and open ground in gray, okay? And it is very interesting that even though the map shows density in terms of a built-up area, the ratios through a study done previously show about equal percentage in terms of coverage. The open space probably 52 to the built 48. Okay, so this is the same map done in the opposite. So the black represents the open, and the gray represents the built-up area. Okay, so just for interest, this very huge, massive building here represents the Fort Jesus, and much of this space out here, even today, is those are civic areas, right, occupied by government buildings. So we have this is a Mbarak Way, and what is referred as Ndiaku. Ndiaku, you can easily translate it to what we know today as the main way. Okay. So what is in Mombasa Old Town? So we have the Swahili type houses. On the right, we have a photo of it and a representation on the right. You notice the height of the buildings, probably in trying to respond to climate. Mombasa traditional house down there with various ornaments, with balconies and doors opening to the street. Then we get types of shop house, for example, with details there. You notice that such cultural heritage requires conservation. And then you get a mosque here that is terminating a vista. These are important. The narrow streets probably can only accommodate one car going one direction. And then you have this other mosque there. Commercial buildings, you find these buildings on the street, and you can see overhanging balconies, these other ones. And then you have some colonial administrative buildings within that area, probably representing the Edwardian architecture. This is the municipal offices. And then this is occupied by the Kenya Commercial Bank. So also looking at building typologies, and we also look at conservation, how conservation has happened. And we look at, in this case, bad examples of conservation. We have this new building there, almost copying what Fort Jesus has done. So in conservation terms, this can be viewed as cheap imitation. And then you have an unconforming buildings there on the right there. Other buildings in need of conservation. They are very interesting property here, but has been neglected as well. This one has also been neglected. You notice buttresses on the street. So there is a history to the evolution of Mombasa Old Town as we know it. So some photographic representation of the various periods. This is Ndiaku that I mentioned earlier, 1895. So you notice a built-up heritage. Many of these are still existing. Ndiaku in 1910, the characteristic arched windows, the balconies with details, and the narrow streets, right? You notice we still have the same, okay, with the current functions such as tourism, okay, and some of the streets now can accommodate parking, etc. You notice now you have drainage channels to manage stormwater in such an area. So we have some sketches that represent the character of Mombasa Old Town as we know it, right? So the character, you notice the buildings are not high, they are densely located, narrow streets, and then balconies overhanging on the streets, and on the ground floor you have doors opening onto the streets. So these are just examples of at various on various roads where you find this character. For example, you have Ndiaku, Sambarak, Hinawi, the other elevation, elevation of the government square, elevation of the old port. You notice the buildings could have been warehouses and things like that. So this represents continuity and change, right? We have had continuity, even though there is dynamism of change. So I'll quickly tackle the topic of becoming heritage. And in this case, the railway is very important to Kenya as a country. So heritage along the East African Railway. So why the railway? It is important to note that Kenya as a country was, or can be attributed to the development of the railway. So the railway created the country. And this resulted in frontier urbanism. And these currently have historic value and heritage value. But it's also important to note that the railway as built was based on the caravan routes. Yeah, so the railway was not the first to get from the coast to the inland of Kenya and beyond, probably to Kisumu and beyond. At that time, Kisumu was part of Uganda. So this route went through periodic markets and centers, some of which have grown into cities of today. It's also important to note that this was referred to as Lunatic Express because this was a government-funded project by the British government, which cost something close to 500 million pounds. In a way, if you look at it, you can see, even with the SGR, history repeating itself. And urban areas were encouraged. I mean, the development of urban areas was encouraged so that this railway would repay itself. So you see history repeating itself. So the railway towns and stations from Mombasa, this is a representation of a map of Kenya from Mombasa all the way to Malaba and Kisumu. The first railway was done from Nairobi to Kisumu up to around 1895 to 1901. Later, it was extended from, there was a branch which was really the main aim to extend it beyond to Kampala, right? Later, just before 1930s, other branches were done. So many of these stations became towns, and that's what we are looking at. We are looking at the railway stations as the core and what urban heritage came about around the railway stations. Some of these railway stations, as we know them right now, do not exist because they have been demolished. Okay, some of that heritage has been demolished. Just take, for example, these are photos from Railways Museum showing various stations, Malaba Station, Eldoret Station, etc. Very close here in Ruiru, we have heritage properties related to the railway. For example, here we have the Ruiru railway station house. It remains operational with minimal intervention, and around it we have a new station. So you can, in a sense, feel that this is undergoing neglect. Inside the station house, you have very important property. You have, for example, railway signal machine. In many other railway stations, these have been lost or vandalized. This is an example of movable property. All right, so this can be categorized into industrial heritage, for example. So what can you do as an interested party? You can, for example, join a lobby society and participate in documentation and create a record, whether it is through sketching, taking photographs, because many of the cultural heritage that we look at, or we probably look at old documents, right? We look at old photos, for example, to get information of what is there. And I know many enthusiasts go out there to document what is there. They come up with books, they come up with blogs. I think there's one blog that has looked at documenting what is railway heritage, referred to as saving the railway. Center for Urban Studies has also done some studies on this. For example, if you are to look at the lobby, Nature Kenya is one example. Nature Kenya is very important to this country because it is the basis, or it is a place where the National Museums of Kenya was created. So it remains a very important place. So Nature Kenya is open to membership. There is also Friends of Heritage Trust Kenya. So if you look at it online, you'll see Heritage Trust Kenya. And for example, they've done a book called Happy Valley Homes. This is heritage in the Happy Valley. So you can read about the stories of Happy Valley, very interesting history. Also, the center is in collaboration with the University of Bristol on building shared features. So we are doing work related. And then also a paper related to this lobby is repatriating the archives with digital humanities. So you notice that especially the movable property, many of the movable properties around the world are misplaced. They are not in the original location. So this paper talks about that. An example is you find Lamu Swahili doors that have been shipped out of the country, and therefore this paper talks about such issues. This is just another example of a paper published under Taylor and Francis Group, Saving the Industry from Itself, the case of railway industrial heritage in Kenya. This is also a very important book, Conservation of Cultural and Natural Heritage in Kenya. It has different chapters authored by different scholars. You can download it at that website there. It is free. Make sure you get it because it has very interesting Kenyan perspectives of cultural and natural heritage in Kenya, right? So under UCL Press, you'll find this book. Once the most important or the keywords are heritage in Kenya, natural and cultural, UCL Press. So what next? What can the country do? So we propose that the government of Kenya should have policies to protect all aspects of historic built environment. We talked about the importance of shared memory, emphasis on the public interest in planning. So public must be involved in planning. Heritage should not be frozen in time. So we need to look at the aspect of change. How do we change, but we still have heritage? And then sympathetic changes, that is cautious approach to change. And especially matters to do with the globalization and things like that. So what is ours? How are we growing and how do we conserve it? Specifically under administrative framework, we have proposed Conservation Areas Development Authority, probably to take care of matters of conservation, to mainstream conservation, ensure public participation, to control aesthetics because there is aesthetics in heritage property, to review all construction, also a financial authority to borrow and use funds for its activities, and also ensure accountability. I am aware that there is such a bill in Parliament. I think it's called the Heritage Conservation Bill of 2019. So some of the proposals are there. The center must have contributed to it. And then the opportunities and new frontiers. So the center is involved in various research. Example is urban ecology, conservation of wetlands in Nairobi, an ongoing study, urban ecology, conservation of urban forests, planning of railway towns, so looking at what is within railway towns, what is there, the what and why we need to conserve it, conservation of Shimoni town at the coast, transportation in historic districts of Lamu, so the challenge of transport within Lamu conservation area, and then climate change and heritage, that is Lamu, Pate, and Gede. So today we were focusing on cultural property, the conservation, a general overview. However, it is important to note that the Center of Urban Studies at SABS also has interests in other areas such as housing, governance, climate change, transportation, history and theory, emerging technology, crime and disaster management, where staff and students are involved in studies and research. So a parting shot for Jomo Kenyatta is that we should establish a museum of technology, being that we are a university of technology, and many of this, much of this heritage can be used for teaching. Thank you very much for listening in. I think I can hand it over to Dr. Kinyo.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Allan. I think that was a very detailed and very interesting presentation. It was like a journey back down the memory lane, looking at all these beautiful heritages. And I think it's also important that you've told us it's important to conserve them. I know there are people here who have always asked, does Fort Jesus, that prime land of Fort Jesus, can't it become plots? But I think your presentation today has given us a very interesting and very important outlook of how things should be. So thank you very much. I think we have a very short time to engage in terms of questions. I think the presentation pushed a little longer, but we are going to take a few questions and a few comments. And in the interest of time, Dr. Maina, allow me to take this very fast. There are questions that were coming on the chat. And I think Professor Mugwima has tried to respond to them, or has responded to them. But probably, Prof, you could also just voice out some of the concerns, because there was a concern on how do we manage to modernize our cities, but at the same time conserve, the cities. There was a question on, the economical value of conservation. For example, Nairobi is expanding, more office space is needed, more apartments, and that old Kipande house can pave way for a skyscraper, which is 100 floors, that can take a lot of people. So where economically, how can conservation level up to the modern land value? And, and I think there was also something about development rights transfer, which is probably Professor Mugwima or Allan, you could give in just add your comments into those before we can proceed.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Prof.
Okay, very well. I saw the comments. Oops. Hello. I saw the comments.
Yes.
And I try to respond to them. Usually, the economics of conservation are very tricky because it's a matter of balancing history. So let's say, for example, you have something which is very dear to you. It could be an old shirt, an old chair. How do you sell it? That's how we see conservation, and that's how we see cultural property. So the cultural value sometimes is beyond economics. And it is for that reason, because we call it history, it is our rootedness. It gives us our rootedness. So our rootedness sometimes cannot be costed. And it is therefore becomes a reason for us to preserve that for the future generations. So if, for example, everybody agrees that there are certain values in certain buildings, in certain landscapes, and those landscapes, for example, are in the middle of town. Let's say they're in the CBD, and that's why I was giving the example of Kipande House. You can tell the owners of that house, Kenya Commercial Bank, please preserve this building as it is, but we know that if you demolished it, you can be able to put up 40 floors here. Those are what I was calling development rights or privileges that can come with that area. Then you say, we will give you a plot in another place, all right? And then in that other place, you can put your 40 floors. And then perhaps you have tax rebates. Sometimes in the developed countries, the buildings are moved stone by stone to another area, all right? And so even, for example, when in the construction of the Aswan High Dam, there was a temple there, almost 3,000 years old, of Queen Hatshepsut. It was moved. And because the dam, the Aswan High Dam in Egypt, was recognized its importance, but it was moved stone by stone, that temple re-elected elsewhere, and the dam was built. So the way to treat this heritage, which is contested, really depends on case by case. But that is what I would say. But we don't have a very big challenge ourselves. No. So some of the other question or the other issue is sometimes when you get an old building and it has heritage value, and the reason that it was constructed no longer exists, then you adapt it to another use. You do minimal changes, especially on the inside. And that is what has happened to the old PC's house, which was called hatches, matches, and dispatches. Hatches because births were registered there. I mean, were registered there, marriages, hatches were registered there, and deaths, dispatches, right? And now it is a museum. Kipande House has a long history. It started as a store, and now it is a bank. So that's what I would say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And what are your thoughts on reusing the Mombasa railway line as a tourist attraction?
I support it thoroughly. In fact, our discussions with the curator at the railway museum, the challenge was that some utensils, silverwares, have been stolen in some of these stations. And there's a time the old train, the railway used to run it from Nairobi to Naivasha for tourism. The old one, the steam one, for a few years ago. Then they stopped. So it can be explored, and we have a lot of this kind of tourism in places like India, Pakistan, where you have railways running in forests, but they renovate them and they use them for railway. They even design a special engine. So my view is that it should be encouraged so that perhaps we can also revitalize the economics of the towns that were along the old railway.
Okay.
Santi.
And is there a time factor that needs to be taken into consideration? You know, when you are considering a feature for conservation. I mean, do we say after 100 years we could, you know, say now it's whatever is over? Can we readapt it, reuse it, or we just bomoa and, you know, do something different? What does the regulation say, or what is the law?
Well, the law is as follows: that anything which existed in this country before the country became a protectorate, whether it is fauna or flora remains, that is 1895, is government property. All right, that is flora or fauna remains that existed in the country before it became a protectorate, which is 1895. But that is not the way we treat buildings, because the buildings are not flora or fauna remains. So for buildings, we just conserve them because they are historic. And historic simply means profound, not necessarily historical. Historical implies time. So if there is value in a building, then you conserve it, even if it was finished yesterday. Just like KICC, which was finished in the 70s, but it has a lot of historical significance. So we can conserve it, and the law allows you. So the law does not limit the age of gazetting or what we call listing buildings. It could have been finished yesterday, and it is listed as a property for everyone for conservation.
Okay. Thanks. And there's a concern that at how counties are turning arable land into concrete. How do we conserve our land? You know, this we've seen a lot of coffee farms that are around towns or around municipalities that have now become, you know, they have been converted to concrete. And there is a comment that if you have an aerial view of Eastlands, for example, if you are from JKIA, is an ISO because there's literally everything everywhere. So how then are we able to control this? Still conserve both the urban infrastructure and probably, I don't know whether I would call it urban land, which if some of it was being for farming or etc., but are still at the same time be able to modernize.
Yes, it's a tricky question when you have open fields, and that falls within what we sometimes call cultural landscapes. And the cultural landscapes could be just that they are beautiful, they are aesthetic, and that happens, for example, a lot in a country like the UK, where they conserve their rolling landscapes, pristine, and they're very proud of them. For us here, honestly, in my view, what we need is social engineering, is greed. So we need to deal with social engineering. I don't know what Obatsa thinks, but that's my view. Social engineering. I mean, everybody, when you want to go and destroy something, it's beautiful, you cut, you want to sell plots. The county, because the law allows now, under the constitution, the heritage aspects are now under the counties, but they haven't really started operationalizing them. So they have those rights to do it. And our business there for you and I is actually to sensitize them. The question that was asked by Obatsa, what can we do? So it is us to tell them. And at the center and as individuals, we do tell some listen, some don't. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Allan, you have something to add?
Yes. In matters conservation, for example, there are specific counties that understand what conservation means to them. Take, for example, Lamu or Mombasa. They understand what conservation means to them. And it is very interesting that the two towns, again, are similar in the sense that both now will have ports, right? So apart from the port, they understand the importance of conservation, and conservation here it means that it has economic value to the county. Okay, so they have mainstreamed, and if you look at what is referred to as the integrated county development plans of either Mombasa or Lamu, you will see that they are very serious about protecting what they have. So in a sense, I would put it differently, probably just echoing what Prof has said, that it is to do with us. We have the laws, we know what is right, but we don't do it, and it is good. Probably the creation of counties is good, so that some counties make others look bad, so that they do the right thing. Thank you, John.
Okay. Thank you, Obatsa. A very interesting a question here by Waweru Mwangi. He's asking, are high-rise buildings better than many smaller ones? For example, at JKU, should we have one tall building like the UN one, or do we have many small ones? And to add to that, just so that you can probably respond, we also saw some time back some of the very old architecture done by JICA many years ago. Now we painted them. You know, they were not painted, just, I don't know, where they just have the rough, you know, old concrete, which looks very nice. But then at some point we painted them with nice JQuat colors. So maybe you could take those two together.
Well, we can start with the issue of painting. The issue of painting is actually a disaster in my view as a conservationist. The rough casts that was on those original buildings were supposed to be maintenance free. And you'll notice that they are an exemplary form of what I would call industrial architecture, basically, if you look at the architecture of JKU there. The issue is that there is never a coordination between the guys who are making the paint, the guys who are painting, the Department of Architecture. So that lack of synergy then leads to that kind of a destruction. So in my view, then there's something that was lost there, which is what we call the spirit of place. As to whether it makes sense to have a big one or a small one, well, generally, if you have land, our view is that you have small ones. If small means not high rise, maybe 3-4 floors. And we have philosophies that guide this. Studies have shown that high rise buildings develop some form of a disease, all right? And some of these diseases, you could even call them, you combine them, they even have terms like sick building syndromes and others. And we do know that, especially for residential buildings, which we know of where they have been brought down, all right? Because they become areas of infamy and crime. So if there are theories that guide us, especially theories of what we call a new urbanism, where you would want to, where social studies of people using space have shown that connectedness to the ground is very important. So unless the circumstance, for example, you are in a very prime place and you have a very small plot, and what you must do for whatever reasons require a lot of space, then you go high rise. Otherwise, we wouldn't encourage them. Thank you.
Okay, very interesting. And probably now, because our time is up, members, just give me about 4 minutes, then we can end at 1:10. How do we interrelate modern architecture with ancient heritage buildings? There's value for the old architecture and value for the modern architecture. But how do we, is there a way we can interrelate both in one single building?
Yes, in the process of marrying the old and the new, we are guided by certain philosophies. One is what we call a harmonic integration. And this philosophy has been there since the 70s. There was a guy who was propagating it called Alexander Papageorgiou. Then he also had the philosophy of harmonic contrast. There are those who argue that something new must look new. So in other words, if you are in an old building and you want to extend it, the extension must look new and distinct. It must not imitate. So it must not create what is called mimetic architecture. There are those who feel that all you need perhaps is to match the materials, but you don't need to match the shapes. So we have various philosophies which have been used very well in these countries that have been doing extensions. And there is a charter that guides how to do such extensions. And that charter is the Venus Charter of 1964. It's fairly detailed. It has been revised recently under the Intibau Charter, but I won't go into it. But yes, we have theory and philosophy to guide us, harmonic contrast and harmonic integration.
Okay, thank you. As we wind up, probably just your thoughts about this. I'm sure you if you've probably visited Addis Ababa recently, probably the last 2, 3, 4 years, you've seen a lot of building going on, skyscrapers, modern buildings happening in Addis. Would you call that a disaster as well, or is it a step in the right direction in terms of conservation?
Well, as long as the heritage, whatever is there, is protected in one form or another. Sometimes even the protection involves just making a record so that in future you may want to go back to what there was. So maybe in Addis, if they maintain the street network, that would be an aspect of conservation. But honestly, studies have shown that this kind of very dense developments are neither here nor there. Eventually, they will be abandoned, and it has happened in the US and other places. So right now, it could be driven by capital, but it is not sustainable in the long run, and that long run may even be 50, 60 years. That's my view, yes.
Wow, great. So it's not always about doing modern buildings and architecture, but there's a lot that needs to go into the thoughts, the thinking, the conserving, the recording, etc. And I like what you said, that sometimes it's just about keeping records. So thank you very much. I think we will stop here. Maybe parting shot, Allan, and parting shot, Professor Mugwima as well. Just 20 seconds. 20 seconds.
Yeah, I think I'll go first.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, participants, for coming for this presentation. I think in terms of conservation, we can call ourselves young in the field of conservation as a country. However, there are opportunities for us to make conservation work for us. Like I said, the parting shot is collective memory that heritage belongs to all of us. It belongs to our future generations. It belonged to our ancestors. Our children have the right to know what we lived through, even though we need to take care of change. So we need to be aware of change as it happens. I am sure the people who are attending today is because they have interest probably in conservation. So there are those areas that have highlighted ways in which you can participate in conservation, whether it's documenting, taking pictures, writing about something, joining an advocacy group, etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mugwima.
Thank you for the invitation to the center and to ourselves to spread this gospel of conservation. There are other types of conservation, for example, vernacular heritage, which is in the rural areas, and perhaps it is more profound. In any case, most of the population lives there. So we would be happy at a later date to talk about vernacular architecture in the countryside and rural tourism. Nobody is talking about rural tourism in this country. Just urban tourism and going to the Mara. Thank you very much for the invitation, Asante.
Thank you very much, our presenters, Professor Mugwima and Allan Obatsa. I think we made the request, and you are very kind to accept our invitation. And I think you also are very kind to help us with the publicizing within your networks. So we really appreciate that. And I also wish to appreciate my staff in the Directorate of Research, Dr. Maina, Dr. Bindio, who are present, and others who are really, William Kahangi, and others who are really very key in organizing this. Thank you very much. Corporate Communications, Jim Maina, thank you very much. Seeing you, and many, many others, participants from the university, from outside. John Maina from Nyeri County, thank you very much. We really appreciate that you could join us. So without taking much more of your time, members, we want to stop here. Thank you very much. Next week, we'll be having another webinar at the same time, and we'll be hosting the CEO of Premier Foods, who'll be talking about the innovations for food innovations in the era of COVID. And they've released some new products that are really immune boosting, etc. So he'll be talking about their journey towards helping the community and the masses withstand COVID. So thank you very much. God bless you and have a good evening.
Director? Director?
Yes, please.
Director?
Please. Yes.
There was a request from Jim Miner from the communications team to have a screenshot. Kindly, if we can have people put on their videos shortly so that we can have a screenshot. There's a request from the communications department on the same. Thank you.
Okay, maybe Allan, you could stop sharing your screen. Then we can put on our videos for a quick screenshot. And then Jim, you'll tell us when you're done. Allan, you could remove your, okay.
Hello, sorry, I didn't get that.
Allan, if you could stop sharing your screen.
Okay.
Then if you could quickly put on our videos for a quick screenshot. Jim.
Still waiting for the participants. From the participants.
Sorry, Jim, are you done?
Yes, I'm done.
Okay. Thank you very much, guys, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay.
Oh. Oh, $12. $12.